What comes up for you when you hear the words mental health? If you're like me, you're quick to think of mental illnesses like anxiety and depression. Maybe you think of medication or a counselor's office. Maybe someone you know comes to mind, or maybe you experience feelings of shame or embarrassment. Whatever comes up for you says something about how you see and understand mental health. The funny thing is, often when we think about mental health, we think only of the negative, which is weird because we don't do this with anything else. If I ask someone what physical health is and they told me that it's not being sick or not having a broken arm, I'd think that's weird. But this is exactly what we do when we talk about mental health. The norm is to think of it as not being depressed and not being anxious. That's a part of it, of course, but it's not nearly the whole thing. The term mental health actually includes a lot of things. How we think, how we feel, how we act, and how we see ourselves. It includes how resilient we are, which is our ability to bounce back from situations or enter into situations that might not work out. It includes our enjoyment of life, our ability to acknowledge and manage our emotions, our desire to make and fulfill goals, and our striving to live a life full of meaning and purpose. And in a way, mental health is a balance of all our health pillars, our physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual health. When one of these is off, our mental health sounds the alarm. Now, generally speaking, you can typically tell when you're not doing mentally okay. You might feel off or down or really tired or super stressed. And on the other hand, when you're mentally doing okay, you probably won't really notice it. Kind of like a tooth. Like, when's the only time you think about your teeth? Probably when they hurt, because when they're healthy, you don't even notice they're there. Our mental health can be somewhat similar. When we're doing all right, our days will probably feel normal. For instance, when I'm doing well, getting up for school isn't hard. I mean, I'd rather sleep in, but not because I don't want to go about another day, but because I just like sleep. I have energy to do things after school. I don't dislike myself when I look in the mirror. If I get a B- on my exam, I'm like, not what I wanted, but it's okay. I'll do better next time. For me, these ordinary ways of feeling that I'm not really even aware of are actually signs I'm doing all right. And like I said, though, it's when we're not doing all right that we are most aware of our mental state. It's a given that we all have mental health, which of course means many of us, if not all of us, struggle with it at some point in our lives. Did you know that in both Canada and the US, around 1 in 5 people struggle with mental illness? And hey, if you're part of that 20%, that's all right. It just means you're part of the human club. Now, according to psychologists, there are currently over 200 identified types of mental illnesses. This includes general anxiety and depression, which we'll talk more about, as they are the two most common mental illnesses out there. But there are a few other common ones that are worth highlighting. Obsessive compulsive disorder, which is recurring unwanted thoughts, ideas, or sensations that make a person feel driven to do something repetitively. Bipolar disorder, which is when a person goes through cycles of feeling intensely happy and invincible, followed by emotional lows. Schizophrenia, which, contrary to popular understanding, is not split or multiple personalities, but rather is an illness where a person sees, smells, or hears things that aren't there, has erratic behavior, or strongly believes something that only makes sense to them and no one else. Like a physical illness, mental illnesses affect the quality and enjoyment of life of those that experience them. And while there are technically over 200 recognized mental illnesses, the reality is that there are as many different expressions of mental illnesses as there are people. Because let's face it, each person is different. My experience of depression or PTSD will be different than yours. And because of that difference, it's one more reason to not reduce someone to a psychological label, as if that just explains them, because it doesn't. In the next episode, we'll talk more about the shame many people feel around the topic of mental health. But before we get to that, take some time to think about your experience with mental health generally. What comes to mind when you hear the words mental health? What's your experience with mental illness? Is it something you've dealt with, or maybe you know someone who's gone through it? Why do you think we treat mental illnesses differently from physical illnesses?